Good afternoon. I'm Andrea O'Sullivan. I'm Executive Director at Partnership for the Public Good. We are a community-based think tank in Buffalo, Niagara, made up of 370 community organizations working to build a more just, sustainable, and culturally vibrant Buffalo, Niagara. And we are here together with several of these partners this morning to express concerns about the City of Buffalo American Rescue Plan funding allocations and process. The American Rescue Plan brought $331 million in federal stimulus dollars to the city of Buffalo. Back in 2021, many of our partners met repeatedly with high-level members of the mayor's administration to discuss what were the most pressing COVID needs that this money could be used to address. Informed by these meetings and a survey that they did of 500 responses gathered from community members, discussions with experts across these issue areas, the mayor then released a draft spending plan for the art funds, and it was adopted by the Common Council in August 2021. The rescue plan that the mayor's office drafted, that the council adopted, included project funds for critical areas such as community food security, community safety in the Neil Dobbins Restorative Justice Fund, frontline arts, health equity, and more. The city launched an application process for many of these funds in October 2022. Many organizations applied for this funding, submitted applications that were all due in December 2nd, 2022. None of those organizations have heard about the funding since, and so many questions have been raised. What's going on with this process? Why isn't the money moving? This morning, PPG, with the support of several of our partners, submitted a complaint to the Department of the Treasury Inspector General. We copied Congressman Brian Higgins and Senator Chuck Schumer, asking for an investigation into the allocation of City of Buffalo American Rescue Plan funds. Our complaint is based on a growing body of evidence that this process has been mismanaged and in violation of the federal procurement rules that the city was required to follow for this funding. Organizations have gone through this application process in good faith, but conversations with members of the mayor's administration and Common Council have shown that determinations about the funds, the timeline of the funding, which organizations would be selected as recipients, have occurred in inappropriate settings and without the rules that normally apply to RFPs for human service agencies. Our partners have brought to us examples of the inappropriate comments that have been made, sometimes right during their interviews with city staff that were an official step in the request for application process. So, for example, some partners in those interview meetings or their follow-up with city staff after were told, don't worry, you're receiving funds, we just can't tell you how much yet. Others were told by city staff, you'll never receive this award because the mayor doesn't like you or your organization. These are really inappropriate comments in what is a highly regulated area of federal procurement. A couple of our partners shared a specific story with us. They were in an interview for the Workforce Training Fund's request for applications, and Harvest House and the Western New York Women's Foundation reported being told by Devone Smith, who's the director of the Buffalo Employment and Training Center in the administration, you're just fixing broken women. And he said to Harvest House, that has a religious affiliation, you should be doing this anyway if you have a faith-based mission, questioning why would they seek funds as a religious affiliated organization. Their proposal was to create a workforce development hub for women on the east side of Buffalo to get reemployed post-COVID. So really at the heart of the purposes of this fund, but those comments again really show the administration's disregard for federal procurement rules and the type of process that this funding is supposed to follow. Similarly, inappropriate discussion of which agencies will receive funding has taken place on the record in Common Council meetings. In the most recent Finance Committee meeting on July 18th, the city's Commissioner of Finance had a discussion with a council member during the meeting about which organizations would or wouldn't receive funding. They discussed one nonprofit, and the council member said, I really hope to see this group on the list. They discussed another nonprofit, and a council member said, I saw they just got money from the city art funds last week. They're on the list again. I don't want to see them get more funding. And this type of conversation really demonstrates that discussion about who's getting art funding has happened outside of the RFP process, and again, in violation of these procurement rules. We would see that Mayor Brown's administration failed to come in and brief the council about how does this funding work? How is it regulated? How does the administration have to run an RFP process? And that led to an environment where they're discussing who gets money, who doesn't get money outside of the formal process. We also see very recently then this request to move 60 million that we discussed about. This, we would say, is in violation of the spirit and the guidelines of the art funding. So we can go to the chart, Sarah, and see this is the request that was brought to Common Council is to cut this amount. So we put together a chart showing what was the original adopted amount and what would those cuts mean. And as you can see, it cuts in most cases 50 to 90% of the funds as they were originally adopted. That 60 million is being moved into revenue replacement, but what we're not being told by the mayor's administration is why that additional 60 million is needed. The city has already put 100 million from the art funds into revenue replacement, which moves it into the general fund. And in fact, as recently as 1 year ago, the city submitted their required performance report to the U.S. Treasury Department. And we have a chart of that as well, which shows they did not report any additional use of revenue loss replacement. So you can see here they projected how will this funding be used in the years ahead. You can see all of the projects that were going to be fully funded that are now being very heavily cut. And in this line submitted to the U.S. Treasury, they said we won't be using any more money for revenue loss replacement. So we need to hear, why did this shift happen? In 1 year's time, why does 60 million more of these public dollars have to be moved into revenue replacement? Part of the reason that that's worrying is with this art funding, when you move it to revenue replacement, you are putting it into the general fund and therefore washing it of all of the federal requirements. So when you move it in that way, arguably the city wouldn't have to follow all of the procurement rules that are necessary when they want to move it out. The other part, though, is you should not be moving funding into revenue replacement unless you're getting pretty specific about what are the budget gaps you're trying to fill. And that's just not something that we've heard a public accounting of. We have heard, however, that at least 10 million of the money requested for this latest tranche of revenue replacement is being wrongly allocated to ineligible expenses. Just in last week's Finance Committee meeting, there was a discussion about why this latest amount of money being moved, and the finance commissioner said we had to make some tough decisions. We had to reduce the budget amount for those programs in order to cover budget shortfalls for fiscal year 24 and 25, and also council member requests for American Rescue Plan funds. So he said the revenue replacement line is made up of 59.9 million. 50 million of that is to cover budget shortfalls. The remaining 9.9 million is for council member requests to use art funds within their districts. He went on to say each council member is being awarded, which they requested, 1.1 million apiece within their districts. They provided where they would like to spend that money within their districts. So moving $10 million of American Rescue Plan funding to council member discretionary funds is simply not revenue loss replacement, and it should not be allocated in this way. This is a pretty clear misuse of funds, and again, an attempt to wash the funds of their federal restrictions so you can then go use them for ineligible expenses and be outside of required procurement processes. I do want to be clear that council members requested items in the art project funds, road improvements, park and library improvements, community center renovations. And that's all good because those will flow through the appropriate bidding channels that will be contracted out through the required regulations. The problem is shifting funds through the general fund in order to then move it to these purposes where it's no longer regulated. We also do want to stress that Common Council members in recent months repeatedly asked in committee meetings, why is this money not moving? Why are we seeing these delays? How come nothing's happened with the RFPs in 8 months? So we are supportive of Common Council in asking those questions and join them in expressing urgency, right? If we go to our last point, Federal American Rescue Plan funding was intended to address Buffalo's most urgent needs, and certainly none of these, when we look at our list of project funds, have been alleviated since 2021. The executive summary of the mayor's own spending plan started by saying, this draft of American spending plan is the culmination of months of research, outreach into the community, public comment and feedback, and discussions with subject matter experts in a wide array of fields. The plan recognizes the once-in-a-generation opportunity this federal stimulus represents, the best ways to address both the immediate and long-term causes of disparate health and economic outcomes which occurred during the pandemic. So we all embrace this $331 million as a transformative once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So much participation happened, as we're going to hear about. And residents, community organizations were told repeatedly, the money is coming, the money is coming. Hold off, and the money is coming. And now, basically overnight, we're told, actually, most of it's not coming anymore. If this $60 million is moved to revenue replacement, more than half of the city's rescue plan funds will have gone to revenue replacement and be lost to these deeply important poverty-fighting, safety-creating causes. If there's an explanation for why such a large sum is needed for revenue replacement, it's incumbent on the mayor's administration to explain those numbers. If they do not, then we hope the Common Council will table this vote tomorrow, and we hope that Congressman Higgins will urge the Department of the Treasury to investigate how such large sums of money are being unaccounted for and moved around in what should be a very public process. I want to turn to some of our partners to hear about their experiences, and then we'll turn to all of you for questions. First up, we're glad to have with us Pastor James Giles, who's the founder of Back to Basics Ministries.
Yes. So we, as of June of 2021, I have 21, 22 organizations that are doing some work in some kind of way toward alleviating violence in this community. It's either a proactive, interruptive process, or after a violence takes place, a healing, a rehab process. So all of those groups, and we have been meeting consistently, and we met consistently in light of the ARP funding. We wanted to make sure that we begin not only establishing networking with each other, we would process and determine what were the gaps and how would resources help us fill those gaps. Because, and even halfway through that process, we determined a lot must be done with our youth because they were getting more and more violent as a result of being trapped off in the pandemic, having to be home. They learned how to surf social media, and that became a way of life to them. And they lost the sense of engagement with each other. And that created some additional tension among them when school opened back up. We had several fights almost every day, right? And it was because of that. I'm happen to be a counselor, and I have assessed that from many of our youth. And so we wanted to begin to develop intervention strategies to begin to interrupt that process, to work with our youth and to engage. And even the element, the fact that we had so many guns on the street, we wanted to begin to address that. And the way we were talking about addressing that is with funds, in this community, engaging with the very element that's bringing that stuff in, that's harboring that stuff, and that's passing it along to our young people. We wanted to do that, and we were doing that in cooperation with other anti-violence groups. And so trying to get information, and this is our biggest complaint. So it's not just me. I represent all of those groups, that Western New York Anti-Violence Forum, of which we even were advocating for the probation department to get more funds. They were part of that process. Judges were part of this process, having these conversations. And so recently, and when we were meeting about the information, how is it going to be spent? We went through all the technicalities of learning what the application process was like, and those that were fell short, we brought in people to help them do the application. So our biggest complaint was, well, nobody is telling us anything. We went through all of this. We jumped through every hoop that was put out there, and it was a difficult process, and nobody's giving us information. And so, and thank you for Partners for the Public Good for doing the necessary research to determine, how it's supposed to be done, why it's supposed to be done, when it was supposed to be done, and they have educated us to this point, and which brings us to the reason that we're here at this meeting.
Thank you so much. And I want to ask, are we okay on mics, or do you want us to center folks right in here? I think. Okay. And just to add, as we turn it to the next partner, as we hear more and more of our partners' concerns, and we have partners like Harvest House and Western New York Women's Foundation that said, please share our story here. We'll go on the record with this. We'll talk to media about this. We're going to keep collecting these stories of inappropriate exchanges during this process. We also today are submitting a FOIL request to city government, asking for all communication between the city and applicants and recipients of ARP funding, as well as the score sheets from the process, which will show us, did they run a good faith process and evaluate these proposals fairly, or what considerations were taken into account? And we'll hear from Murray Holman, who's Executive Director of Stop the Violence Coalition.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here because I really respect our time and effort to really put this on the table that our community has been waiting a long time. We had a press conference saying that we were going to get some funds. It did not happen. It's in the media. It's in the Buffalo News, and our community said, "Well, what happened to the funds?" And my answer is, we're waiting. But crime does not wait in our community. Violence does not wait in our community. So we have to go out with the help of Pastor Giles and others and find resources through the community to help us along the way. Spend funds that we don't have and then try to recoup it back. This is part of the American Rescue Plan funding there. And now we almost a year in, half of that grant is almost used up. So now we have to figure out, how do we take information that we have and data and push it forward so we can get reimbursed. My mission is to make sure that our youth get opportunity to get jobs, to do things like that, to pay for mentors and things like that there under the program. It was a great program when Mr. Higgins came to us. It was a great program. All we want to say is here, put the funds where they need to go right now without red tape. You're having a meeting tomorrow. The community does not know about it and who we are. Partners don't know about it. We went by your guidelines and went through the process, and we have not called you, and we're sitting here waiting like everyone else. That's not fair to our community. It's not fair to our organizations. So we say to the Common Council and to our mayor, put the funds where they need to go.
Thank you so much. We're going to hear from Tim Chen, Executive Director at Grassroots Gardens, and let us switch spots so you're right there.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm going to read a statement because I'm not as articulate as our friends here. I'm here today to urge our representatives and allies in our city government to vote no tomorrow on the American Rescue Plan budget amendment, which seeks revenue replacement for the city by stripping away over $60 million federal dollars that were specifically earmarked for community-related needs. The city has held these funds for close to a year after various community groups, including Grassroots Gardens, submitted lengthy applications last November and December for funds specifically allocated to areas such as food security, supporting the arts, restorative justice, and more. Included in this funding is $1.5 million for community food ownership projects, which has now been cut by 50%. Food insecurity issues have long existed in Buffalo, but recent events continue to lay bare the need for supporting not only projects like grocery stores and neighborhoods, but for direct connections and opportunities in communities to be involved with our local food systems. Funding our city's budget is important. However, balancing the budget should not be at the expense of community groups who received a commitment from government officials that this funding was available for application, only to see the opportunity withdrawn or severely watered down after almost a full year of waiting. Organizations like Grassroots Gardens and our partners here in this room have supported the progress, revitalization, and growth of communities in our city for years. We urge the city to honor its commitment to these organizations by keeping this funding available as it was originally allocated. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. And next, we have from Julio Enrique Flores, who's Executive Director at El Museo.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to speak on behalf of a collective of frontline arts organizations who are feeling very disheartened by the possibility of losing so much potential funding that we worked very hard to apply for. I'm going to just go ahead and read a couple of things off of my notes here. As has already been mentioned, close to $2 million that could have been a direct impact on our artists, arts organizations, students, and audiences. ARP funding was meant as a recovery fund for the effects of the pandemic. Our city's art and cultural organizations suffered as a whole, but our frontline arts organizations felt and continue to feel the effects. We operate on shoestring budgets with minimal staff. Every dollar received makes a difference. We've been trying to work with the city for 2 years to get funding for frontline arts organizations included in the ARP, and we seemingly succeeded. But to have the rules changed on us mid-play, that's devastating for organizations that are already struggling. I'll leave it at that, but I'm here to answer other questions, and fellow colleagues of mine are here from the other arts organizations that can give you all details. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe our last speaker, we are going to hear from Heather Green, who's a board member at Locust Street Arts Center and also part of Frontline Arts Buffalo.
Thank you so much to PPG for organizing this. As a board member at Locust Street Art and a member of Frontline Arts Buffalo, I witnessed firsthand how admirably Frontline Arts organizations tried to pivot to the ever-increasing obstacles the city presented throughout this process. All of these Frontline Arts organizations have done an amazing job just to have the city pull the rug out from under them. I do want to lift up that the original proposal that Frontline Arts Buffalo presented to the city in 2001 outlined a fund that would build up organizational capacity through an intermediary, which would allow for frontline organizations to apply for the needs-based funding without jumping through unnecessary hoops. What was eventually included in the American Rescue Plan has lost the spirit of the original intended fund and instead become so watered down as to become a hindrance rather than a help. The key performance indicators that had been met in the final RFA were steep, and required a ton of effort to be met. In addition, now large arts organizations were allowed to apply, as there were no guidelines around organizational budget sizes, and instead requirements that made it difficult, if not impossible, for small arts organizations like Locust Street and El Museo to apply. Sorry, I have one more thing I'd like to say. I know that each frontline organization, all frontline organizations, that applied easily spent 40 hours of precious staff time on this application process. It was not an easy application. It was incredibly labor intensive. And if we include the advocacy work that Frontline Arts Buffalo and the Frontline Arts community members have done, each member has easily spent over 100 hours working on getting this funding included in the ARP over the past 3 years. To take so much labor from our frontline arts organizations is incredibly upsetting and hurtful to the communities who need the support the most. Like, it's just insult to injury to really take so much time from all of our organizations and then to remove the funding at the end. So, as a board member and as a member of Frontline Arts Buffalo, this has just been an incredibly heartbreaking process. Thank you.
Sorry. And it's really that kind of erosion of public trust and accountability that also drew us to file this complaint and really challenge some of these irregularities that we're seeing. You heard how organizations that are dealing with the most pressing issues in our community were basically distracted from their work. Their time was wasted putting these proposals together, highly complicated federal applications with very little support from the city. And now, as we heard, the rules are changing again. So if any questions from media folks here?
Just so I'm clear, it's perfectly legal for the city to do this? I mean, this money was obviously allocated, not for the city to use it for revenue replacement, but this is perfectly legal for the city to take this money.
According to the guidelines, it is permitted for the city to move more into revenue replacement. But to move 50 million without input, without explanation, let alone public input, just really shows a disregard for the purpose of the funding. And we also heard in Common Council meetings over months, several Common Council members saying, we're worried that they're sitting on this money so that all these folks up here will go away. We'll get distracted. We'll lose the focus on these important projects and issues, and then they'll just be able to pad the budget with it. And unfortunately, that's what we've seen happen. The longer they delay, the more they're kind of able to keep turning into the general fund and lifting all of these purposeful restrictions from it.
And when you see,
And just so you know, I'm not challenging the city's right to do something. I saw the legislation when it first came out. What we're challenging is the process whereby this constituency, who have a right to know, and particularly the partners that have been so involved and so invested in the process, have been eliminated from the information relative to how that's done and what is going to be the impact and how it's impacting those organizations that apply. That's what the challenge. I can't let it get confused with the right for the city to do that.
so I guess adding insult to injury is the way to process has been done. That's fair to say.
After the initial adoption, I think a lot of these partners were highly consulted in the lead up to the initial spending plan in August 2021. And then once that was adopted, which was required for them to receive the money, it just turned into delay and unraveling really from that point on.
We could determine revenue replacement that could be used for something related to the city.
What's interesting is this is not the only revenue replacement that they are reporting. If you do look at the city's reports to the Treasury Department, there are specific lines of revenue replacement, and we're not contesting those, right? A specific line. There is a need in the fire department. Revenue was lost because of COVID. We're filling that. There's a need in, say, youth services. We're filling that. This is revenue general replacement, right? Where it's basically going into the black hole of the general fund, and we're not being told these are the specific gaps we're filling, and we're not being told where it goes. And so that's a big part of the problem. Yeah, do you want to?
Also, it's them giving information without the process being completed. Also, that's kind of a separate point.
Yes, so we have, are they allowed under the guidelines to move money into revenue replacement? And then we have, are you allowed under federal procurement rules to talk to people about who got it and who didn't, to make comments like that? No, you're absolutely not. So they did not run a robust RFP process as required. And, we've all seen so many government fair contracting, bid rigging issues, all of that. And this is veering in that direction of very poor procurement practices.
Who here has reached out to the mayor's office and gotten not a favorable response by him or his staff?
Well,
please.
I've had conversations with the mayor. Matter of fact, I've been around City Hall since before the mayor got there, having relationships with them in terms of funding processes, and know everybody there. So I've talked with a number of people, including the mayor, about this because, again, I'm representing not just myself, but there's a huge block of people that are invested in this process. So And as a leader in the community, I have a responsibility to at least ask. And I have reached out to try to get information relative to this process, who's getting what, how they determine it. And that information has not come out thus far.
And we have also reached out to city staff that we knew were involved in administering the RFPs for certain funds. At PPG, we do not seek city funds, so we're not a potential beneficiary of this. But many of our partners are saying, what's happening? Is this money coming? Are they ever going to select folks? And ironically, when we reached out, those folks said to us, oh, it's an open RFP process, so we can't speak about this. So they know the procurement rules when they want to not answer general questions about whether this money is coming. But clearly they don't all know the procurement rules, or they wouldn't make these inappropriate comments in public conversations. But that's been certainly a line used, as we can't talk about this at all because the application process is still ongoing.
Going forward, tomorrow there's a vote, common council, I would like to see them vote on that change in the budget. But after that, we'd like to see the process kind of get reset and be done in a different way. Is that what you're calling on as well?
Yeah, I think Common Council is being put in a very difficult position tomorrow. It's their last meeting before their August recess, and they're being told by the administration, you need to vote on this before you go on recess. The city's next federally required report to the Treasury Department is due at the end of this month. So I would imagine they're being told, you need to vote on this or a report will end up late. So we think they should table that vote anyway, and allow for discussion and really demand public explanation of why this money, additional funds are needed for revenue replacement. And also, we would like to see an investigation of the many inappropriate comments happening throughout the process. Anybody else?
Have you guys gotten any of the common council on your side to kind of vote with, or help vote this down for you guys?
We have talked personally with several of them in the last 3 or 4 days. Many of them have shared concerns that they've stated in committee meetings on the record with the process from the start, with what's happening with the money. I think they're being put in a tough position. And also this is now being packaged, as we shared, with $10 million in funds for their districts. So if you say, please approve 50 million in cuts, and then we'll send 10 million to your district funds, that's a very hard position to put them in as well. They're supposed to advocate for their districts. So I don't have any of them that have expressly said we're voting no on this, because I think they've been put in a really tough spot.
Kind of related to this, in a separate tranche, is the money that's being discussed for small businesses, including the Brainville Market down here. Just curious if you have any comment on that allocation or that proposed allocation.
Anybody want to jump in for me? I will just say that the fact that that's being discussed and negotiated at the same time has further complicated this issue. We still don't know, based on the Finance Committee discussions. They've announced a $5.5 million fund for small businesses other than Bray Miller. That's part of the negotiations. I believe that comes back before the council tomorrow as well. Where is that coming from in relation to this list or the 60 million? We don't know that yet. Will that mean further cuts here? Will they take that out of the 60 million? Were council members also asked, vote for this cut and we'll give you the new small business fund? We don't know that, but it's quite messy and all being discussed at the same time. And you can hear that in the committee discussions as well. The separate items on the council agenda of Bray Miller and Small Business Fund and budget amendment for ARP, the discussion is blurred and they refer to both items at the same time. So I think there's definitely interplay there, but we don't know the full extent of it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all for coming. And we've got some copies of our complaint letter we can give to you on the way out too.